Well, hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne. Thank you very much for finding my channel where I try and grow cold, cool, intermediate orchids in Melbourne, Australia without any grow lights or greenhouses or humidifiers, really just me and them inside or outside or not at all. So plant lovers of the world, thank you for finding my channel in the crowded YouTube world. And if that sounds like your bag, hit subscribe. I post every week on a Friday, but I am a complete amateur, which means take everything I might say with a pinch of salt. But, so saying, today is somewhat triumphant, perhaps in two cases, perhaps in three, or perhaps just in one. I will explain, because today, plant lovers, it's all about things that are in spike. Now, it is very late autumn here in Melbourne. It hasn't really got that chilly yet. I mean, chilly is comparative, but Melbourne hasn't really kicked in with its cold weather, which you can do this time of year. So the minimums are still okay for most orchids that are sort of intermediate-y. Most of the ones that are sensitive I have brought inside to overwinter indoors. But so far, so good climate-wise. But it's been a bit of a weird season, and some things are in spike that really shouldn't. But anyway, we'll get to that. What we're doing today is reviewing everything that's in spike, and some things are in spike for me for the first time, which is so exciting. I almost don't know what to do. But anyway, let's crack on. Now, it is a somewhat, it's a somewhat dour season. The leaves are dropping, which is very beautiful, but there's often not much colour apart from leaves. So it's really great to see that all of these things are going to be in bloom within the next couple of weeks, and some things are sort of peaking almost now. So there's going to be lots for us to follow up on in the next couple of weeks, but let's go through all of these one by one. So it's May in Melbourne, which is late autumn. June is the beginning of winter here. I know for all of you in the Northern Hemisphere, that is very hard sometimes to get your head around, but there we go. We are heading into winter. And what happens in very early spring is that all the, well, not all, but a lot of Australian orchids come into bloom. So Sarcochilus and Dendrobiums. So let's start with those. And here is a little Australian native Dendrobium hybrid that is in spike. Now it is a little early for a lot of the Australian Dendrobiums, such as Kingianum speciosum delicatum, to start really showing their spikes at this point. It's still, well, autumn, so generally you wouldn't really start seeing anything until well into winter. But anyway, I have noticed that some of them, particularly the smaller, more compact ones, do tend to flower much earlier in the season. Anyway, this one is in spike, and in fact that'll probably open next week. And this is a hybrid called Jesmond Sparkler Greg Hall. So Jesmond must have been someone quite fabulous, and Greg Hall equally so. Anyway, so there we go. This was a seedling, and I haven't actually looked at the ancestry of this one to see what's in its DNA, but anything with a bit of speciosum in it can take years to flower from seedling size. So this was last year's cane and it's blooming. This is this year's cane, which has just matured, and I think there is a nib of a flower spike in that and in this one. Now these will all reflower from the same cane. This is still quite a juvenile plant though. I had one flower last year from a cane, and I think a lot of these canes do look like they have got the beginnings of spikes in. This one is just much more advanced than the others. Anyway, so that's first cab off the rank, a little Australian Dendrobium hybrid. Jesmond Sparkler Greg Hall in spike and almost about to open. Next cab off the rank then, as I said, Sarcochilus. Now I've got a lot of Sarcochilus, and this one I made a repotting video about. It's a beautiful red, velvety red Sarcochilus, so I'll link that one. And it's going to be hard to show you, but I will try. I might come a little closer, but let me see. Yeah, there we go. We can see in there, that little bright green nib there, and there's a few more about the plant. So they're the beginnings of the flower spikes. Again, late winter, early spring. So this is one of the first ones to show spikes for me. Sarcochilus hartmanii is usually the first one to bloom for me, which is a species type, and the first one to finish. But various of the hybrids have their flowering cycles at slightly different times. So you can get quite a few weeks of flowering out of them, because unfortunately, the flowers don't last a long time and they only bloom once a year. So the more Sarcochilus you have, I think, the more chance you have that they'll all open slightly differently, and you might get 4 to 6 weeks out of them. But what I've just noticed here, you see, there is a dead leaf. Now, someone did once ask me about leaves on a Sarcochilus, I would say 1 or 2 leaves a year should be dying and dropping off, and they're obviously going to be at the base of the plant. If anything's happening at the top of the plant, you've got a problem. But this is a very old leaf from the bottom, you can see completely dead. So yeah, you shouldn't have too much leaf loss from Sarcochilus. In fact, there's another one there, and I would say those are probably the only 2 leaves I've picked off this in well over a year. Anyway, looking very healthy. It should have beautiful flower spikes. When my Sarcochilus are all in bloom, I will follow up. And remember, I made a video with Dan, who is a wonderful grower just around the corner from me, and I'll link that below. His collection of Sarcochilus was a sight to behold and has filled me with not envy, but with ambition to try and get the same bench looking beautiful and covered in colour. Anyway, Sarcochilus in spike. Next cab off the rank, another Dendrobium. Now this one is a little beauty, and this one is Dendrobium moniliforme, and this is the variegated form. There we go. So this one is largely from Japan, I seem to remember, and there is a standard version which doesn't have the variegation and a variegated one, and I have read that the variegated one isn't as vigorous when it comes to flowering, which might well be the case, because this I think is getting pretty perfect conditions in terms of light and then withholding water as we get into this season now, autumn and winter. Plenty of new growth. It was about 3 very sad looking sticks when I bought it at quite some expense, I have to say. Not that easy to come by. But anyway, I'm not really into variegation. I'm really not. But I don't know. This one I just thought was quite attractive. First thing to note, yellowing leaves. So as the canes mature, the leaves are going to yellow and drop off. And what you can see here, these are the 3 little sticks that I had when I bought it. So they do become deciduous with age. So don't worry if on your older canes, your leaves start to yellow and drop. It is totally normal. Again, if it's happening on new growths and new leaves at the tips, there is something else going on, which is sinister. You need to investigate more. But what we can see, plant lovers, can you see on the leaf junctures there, those little pointy nibs? They are the flowers. Now, there's a few dotted about, but it's not covered in them. And I kind of would have hoped it would have had more. There are, I think there's about 3 or 4 canes that have got little flower buds emerging. Now, it's fairly early in the season. This will bloom again early spring, so I might get more. These might just be the first flush. There might be more to come. But anyway, be interested to know if anyone else grows the variegated form, whether you think it flowers less than the non-variegated form. Anyway, I'm happy it's got some little buds coming. I can see some on this leafless cane. I can see some on this cane at the back, and I can see some on this one. Anyway, so there's a few spots where we've got some flowers coming. It's not going to be the most earth-shattering show, but there we go. Dendrobium moniliforme, variegated in spike. Next is a Paphiopedilum. Look at that. It's one of those beautiful mottled leaf ones, and this is an orchid that would look stunning without a flower, because look at those leaves. Yowza, divine. Now what I've noticed is there is a dead leaf there. And as per Sarcochilus, you shouldn't really be losing that many leaves, you know, 1 a year. This is very old, very dead, and I'm just going to use my wonderful Chinese scissors to snip that off. There we go. Now this I bought from the wonderful Michael Coker that I made a couple of videos with. We made a video about deflasking and about Phragmipedium, but he also grows Paphiopedilum, and I bought this from a sale of his. And as you can see, ta-da, 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 flower spike nestling in the middle there. Now, it doesn't have a label. It is a green and white flower, and a viewer did tell me what they thought the plant was. It is a species, they thought. And I have completely forgotten what it is. Anyway, there we go. For the moment, it's a no ID, but it is a green and white flower. Very beautiful. Now, with this type of Paph, you can see there, I had a flower before, and that fan, which is what you call those sort of leaf growth moments, then won't flower again. But what that will do is then produce a new growth, which is this one here, which is then coming into bud. Now, once that flower dies, the fan won't die, but it won't bloom again. But what you want then is the new growth for the next fan to produce the next flower, etc. And what we can just see in the bottom there is the new fan that is starting to grow, that's going to replace this one when that flower has finished blooming. So there we go. Paphiopedilum with a beautiful, beautiful mottled leaf that is about to bloom. Okay, let's talk about something, a near-death experience. How about that? Not for me, for an orchid. Now this beauty, which, you know, doesn't look too bad now, but wasn't so long ago. This is a species Phalaenopsis and it's called Aphrodite. And as you can see on that label, it is apparently from the Philippines. So warmer grower with the most beautiful, beautiful flower. And I just went through a moment, maybe a year and a half ago, of deciding my life wasn't complete unless I had species Phalaenopsis. So I bought about 4 or 5, I think. Most of them were seedlings, which are still growing. Will I live long enough to see those bloom? Who knows? Watch this space. Anyway, this one was a mature flowering size plant. And in fact, it was in bloom when I bought it. And I may have included it in a video. I'll see if I can find it and link. Anyway, I then, plant lovers, as one does, took my eye off the ball and a home goal was scored. I didn't focus on watering it properly. Now, when I bought it, it was in a sort of a plastic cage, one of those perforated orchid pots with very little medium. Kind of perfect for a phal if you're in a much more tropical area with lots of air movement and humidity where you can water it and you've got no fear of cold and no fear of rotting. Not great for my conditions. So I had in my mind the idea that I needed to repot it in a medium that was going to work more for me in my climate, which is more bark based with sphagnum. Big bark, but sphagnum. So it retains a bit of moisture, allows the plant to hydrate itself, and is not going to dry out. However, I didn't do it in time. And so I then suddenly noticed the plant looked as wrinkly and tired and old as I do, plant lovers. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to lose it. And it was not inexpensive because it's a flowering size plant when I bought it. Anyway, emergency repot. So this is just a bought orchid pot from hardware store in terracotta. So some aeration all the way around. I used very large bark pieces and a lot of sphagnum to retain the moisture but make it free draining. And I repotted it and made sure that some of the roots were in that mixture. It had a lot of aerial roots. Now some of the aerial roots had died because they had desiccated because I hadn't watered enough. So I did trim off those, and what you can see is it's producing lots of new beautiful growth. Anyway, my experience with Phalaenopsis has been that the leaves often won't recover if they're dehydrated. They will look wrinkly and leathery until the new ones grow and demonstrate your good plant growing skills. However, this one did bounce back. So the leaves did rehydrate and become glossy and beautiful again. And what I have just noticed is that in there, which is a flower spike. Now, interestingly, compare and contrast, what you can see there, and I'll come in and take a close-up to show you, is a new root. Now, at this point, they're both about the same length. And it could be, if you didn't know what you're looking for, easy to confuse the two. Because often with phals, when you're just starting to grow, you do get excited when a root's coming because you think it's a flower spike. Well, it's not in this case. That is definitely a root. And you can tell it is because it's got a very lime tip, but essentially it's sort of mahogany brown color from the very get-go. Now, if we look at that one in there, you can see that it is purely bright lime. It's a slightly different shape. It's sort of thinner and flatter, and it's pointing up, and it's growing out of the leaf juncture there. So it's growing in a spot where a flower spike should be. Now, you can get roots growing in those spots, just to add to the confusion, but the shape of it, it's flattened, and it's more sort of dome-like. And the color from the get-go, very, very, very different from a new root that's growing. Anyway, Aphrodite, goddess of beauty and love, is in spike. That's going to take months. Well, quite a while to grow and flower. But anyway, we've begun. Next is an orchid with 2 names, because why have one when you can have 2? But I go by the name of Epidendrum centropetalum. I've made a video about this. It is such an odd plant. Look at those aerial roots. Now you might look at that and think, ooh, that is cakying like there's no tomorrow because it's not getting the right conditions, Matthew. If you Google the plant, you'll see mature plants, and this is what it does. It has this odd habit. So you could certainly propagate the plant from these sort of cakeys, but they're not really cakeys. They are new growths that happen to have roots. Anyway, it's an odd growth habit, but it is as it should be, really. So what you get each year, well, in its growth cycle, is a new cane like this one. And then that cane flowers from the tip, and this one has got flower spikes. Then it will mature, become a little leafless, so the leaves will start to drop, and in fact that one is starting to do it right now. There's one dropping off there. And then, like this one, it will start to branch and produce aerial roots. And then the original cane that's flowered will not flower again, but the new growths that you get from the tip of it will. And if you look at that one, you'll be able to perhaps see that there are flower buds just emerging in the tip of that. But the tip of the original cane, which is this bit here, which is a little brown and wizened, that's the remains of last year's flower, and that is not flowering again. So it's a very interesting flowering habit. It's a beautiful mauve flower. I'll drop in a picture if I've got one, and I will link the video to the care video for this. Now, this is one of those plants that I summer outside under cover, but in bright light, and bring inside in winter because I've never seen it for sale since, and I would hate to kill it. I think it probably could take cooler temperatures, but don't want to risk it. Anyway, I'm kind of loving that, and the bigger the plant gets, the crazier it's going to be with all these spidery aerial roots. So there you are. Epidendrum, centropetalum in spike. Okay, next. Odd season. Now, I have a lot of Cymbidiums. I've made a lot of Cymbidium videos. I'll link my playlist. And they always bloom in spring for me. And you start to see the flower spike emerging in winter, and then they mature and they'll flower depending on the hybrid, you know, from any point from late winter through spring, and sometimes really into late spring. Really depends on where you are, the conditions, and the species ancestors. However, this year in Melbourne, and it's not just me, but lots of growers, I've got a Cymbidium that is actually just opening, and it is late autumn. Now, it's certainly got a bit of Tracianum in its ancestry, which is a species orchid that flowers in autumn. But this plant for me has only ever previously flowered in spring. And now we are in late autumn, and it is opening to the world. And I'll make a video about those because there's actually about 4 plants that are at the same point, and they'll all be open at the same time. Quite amazing. Anyway, I'm pretty sure they're not going to flower in spring because with a Cymbidium, the spike comes from last year's growth that's matured, so there are no more mature growths to flower from, so we have to go through the whole growth cycle again. So I think this is it, but they've just decided to bloom early. Now, I don't think we've had particularly crazy weather here in Melbourne. It wasn't a very hot summer. There was a few hot moments. It was, you know, maybe slightly colder than average, but not crazy cold, nor was it crazy hot. Nor has it been very cold very early, nor has autumn been unusual. So I can't really pick it. But anyway, anyone out there growing Cymbidiums in Melbourne, let me know. But everyone I've spoken to so far is in a similar state, and actually across the east coast of Australia, that Cymbidiums have just decided, the collective unconscious, they're all going to flower early this year. And because I've got so many in spike and they're all too big, I focused on 2 that are manageable, but this one is the most interesting, and yeah, quite a conundrum. Anyway, there you can see very, very healthy asparagus-like flower spike. Look at that. You can see it's going to have a very distinct form. Now, I've never bloomed this before, and as you can see from the plant, it was a propagation from a back bulb. So there's the back bulb. This is the new growth that emerged, but that new growth is flowering. Now, I fully expected that this would take another couple of years to develop another couple of growths, another few bulbs. But anyway, there you go. It has decided to bloom already. But what's interesting about this, perhaps you can see from the bulb and the leaves, you might not get a sense, but they are really quite leathery and tough. Now, 50% of this, and I'll tell you what it is, it's a hybrid, and it's called Caned Magic Kobe. There we are. So it's a hybrid between a lot of species, but 50% of its ancestry is the Australian Cymbidium canaculatum. And you can very much see that in the shape of the pseudobulb and the leaves. Now, I have canaculatum, and I will link my video about that. Canaculatum is an orchid in my conditions that needs a complete dry winter. And in Melbourne, which is not its ideal condition, it's native to far north Australia, which has a tropical monsoonal climate. So it does have a very regular, rigid, completely dry but very hot season. So in Melbourne, though, they do survive. They do flower. Mine did. And I bought mine from a grower that's grown it for years. And her point was, do not water it from March until Melbourne Cup Day, which is the first Tuesday in November. That is a long time, plant lovers, between drinks. Anyway, I did that last year. It flowered, it's happy, and it's producing a new growth. Now, I'm not watering it. Maybe 2 or 3 times in that period, I might moisten the medium if it's a warm, windy day so that it will evaporate and not rot the plant. But anyway, so far so good with that one. My question for you though, viewers out there, is if anyone else has got a hybrid that is at least 50% of that canaculatum, what are the care conditions in winter? So my fear is that if I water this in winter, I'm going to rot it. But if I don't water it, half of its ancestry are the more regular Cymbidiums that need moisture all year and bloom in spring. Anyway, just curious. What I've decided to do is compromise, which is not water it much in winter, but not give it that really vicious dry spell that canaculatum needs. Anyway, love to know if you're growing one of these Aussie hybrids and how you go about it. Needless to say though, it's in spike, which I'm kind of confused about, but whatever, very happy. The flowers I think are quite extraordinary. So when this opens, I'll certainly follow up. Next cab might be wishful thinking. It is one of the Catasetum type of orchids. There you go. Look at that pseudobulb though. Now, I think I had 5 and now there are 3, which sounds like a bad Agatha Christie play. But anyway, now there are 3. We're going into autumn, so it's about to go into its dormancy phase, which means the leaves are starting to turn and you are on the brink of eliminating water. So I think I've got that basic cycle right, which is allowing it to go into dormancy, completely withholding water, completely all winter, like canaculatum, and then in spring, last year's growth, which is then denuded, you can see that's last year's, will produce a new growth, which is this one. You then have to wait until it's about so big, until the roots are, reasonable. Then you start watering it like there's no tomorrow and feeding it like there's no tomorrow, because this pseudobulb and growth all happens in one fairly short, sort of 4-ish month period. So a lot of growth to do, so it needs lots of food. Anyway, it also wants a lot of bright light and a lot of movement and humidity. So in summer, I take these outside and have them quite high. They get really bright indirect light and I just hose them and water them and feed them constantly. And then when the winter minimums start to get a bit low in autumn, I bring them in before the leaves have dropped and allow them to go into dormancy inside, and they're on a north-facing window, which in the southern hemisphere is the bright part of the house. In the northern hemisphere, it'll be a south-facing window. So they get bright indirect light all winter, but it's a little cool because they're against the glass. So it does cool down quite a bit at night and they're getting that temperature change. So far, so good. Now I lost 2 because I just got those timings a bit wrong and I left them outside too long. They got a bit damp and the bulb started to rot. And in fact, you can see on this one, this was last winter or the winter before, I left it too late, but managed to save it and the rot didn't spread. It produced new growth for me, and then this one, which is wonderful. Now, never flowered for me, and it is autumn, and what I have noticed, plant lovers, at the bottom is that green nib. Now, it's coming from the base of this year's growth. That's what a flower spike should do. It's appearing in autumn when there's still leaves on the new growth. It's kind of what it should do. And this would not produce a new growth shoot until spring, when the whole thing has gone into dormancy, been withheld of water, and then kicks off the cycle again. I can only assume, plant lovers, that is the beginning of a flower spike. If it is, I will dance the fandango and wave lots of flags because it will be quite an achievement. These are quite hard to grow in Melbourne. Again, Michael Coker, that I made those 2 videos with, grows and flowers these successfully. So I do want to make a video with him about how he manages Catasetum type of orchids. And just for your information, it's, is it Fredclarkeara? I think that's the combo. And it's called Midnight Lace. So it's a complex hybrid, but these sort of Catasetum types basically all take the same care, which is that really completely dry winter dormancy with the new growth appearing, waiting till it's big, watering it, feeding it, getting this growth flower. Ta-da. Next, a success story. Laelia. Ta-da, 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 ta-da. Oh, this is a big beast. Look at all those spikes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Absolutely amazing. And I did make a video about this one, I think last year when it bloomed, had 1 spike for me and I was so excited. This year it's got 4 because I changed how I grow it, plant lovers. And this is a hybrid called Rosey Tiger. Now, 4 wonderful spikes. They grow from the tip of the new growth, and you can see it's a very, very vigorous grower. Quite a creeper too, very rhizomous. Now, I had 1 flower last year because these plants like a lot of bright indirect light, like cattleyas. They can also take direct light in the morning and then bright indirect light afterwards. And it just wasn't getting enough light. And I didn't think I'd be able to give it enough light until perhaps we move and then everything is going to be beer and Skittles, I tell you. Anyway, but I did figure out there was a space I could put it where it's going to get more consistent indirect light all year. And look what happened, ta-da, ta-da. However, before I found that space, I did put them in a space where they were getting direct sun in the morning. And I have 3 of these. One is white, one is pink, and one is a much deeper magenta. Now, surprise, surprise, I took them from areas which weren't too bright and put them in quite strong light too quickly and really burnt the leaves. Now, this one was the strongest of them all, and there's just a little bit of, can you see, burning on the tip there and on the tip of that leaf? So a bit of sun damage, and I saw it happen and immediately moved them. Now, the other 2, unfortunately, were quite badly burnt and most of the leaves dropped. Now, they're coming back, they're sending new growths, and all will be well, but they are not going to flower for me because they've got a lot of recovery to do. And that's the thing about orchids. It can take a year or 2 to recover from a mistake, but I made the mistake, shifted them into too brighter light too quickly, didn't sort of acclimatize them. Anyway, bright light is the key, ta-da, ta-da. Also, the spikes can be really, really long on these as well, so that's something else to bear in mind. It's a bit of a tricky orchid if you don't have the space. Look at the size there. Anyway, this will be amazing when it's out, and I'll show you. Next up is a Cymbidium that should be in spike at this time of year because it's a species one. Now, goodness, it's quite hard to show you. Now, you can see in there, we've got that beautiful spike there, and there's a second little spike just emerging in there. There we go. So this is an interesting species Cymbidium called Cymbidium manguanense, and it has quite an odd growth. As you can see, it kind of grows in this manner, not dissimilar to sort of some vandas almost. So it grows basically a stem and the leaves fan out from it. And it flowers from that stem continually. So with your more traditional Cymbidium, you know, the hybrid ones that you get a new pseudobulb and that sends out the flower spike and the next year new growth, blah, blah, blah. Generally, well, that pseudobulb won't flower again. You have to get the new growth to mature and flower for you. But this one continues to flower from the same stem. Now, I've only ever had 1 flower on this before, 1 flower spike, and each flower spike has about 4, 5, 6 flowers, and they're white and very beautiful. I've got an image, I think I'll drop it in. But this year, actually, I've just noticed I've got 3 spikes. Goodness me, there's another one in there. 3, that is very exciting. So what I've discovered is that I've got 3 sort of growth points. One of them was the oldest and most mature. That's flowered for me before. This second growth hadn't flowered before, and that is the one that has got 2 spikes on it. So it's going to be amazing. And then over here, there's 4 growth points actually. There's another fan here, which is quite young. That hasn't bloomed. There we go. Anyway, so very upright, handsome plant. They're very upright, beautiful flowers, and I will certainly come back and show you when that's in bloom because it's going to look quite amazing with 3 spikes. But plant lovers, we are saving the best for last because a couple of years ago I made a Zygopetalum rescue video, and what do I have here? That very plant with 2 flower spikes. Look at that. I think I can just, I was going to say die and go to heaven, but I don't want to die and go to heaven. I want to continue growing orchids, but I have just not been able to get zygos to flower for me at all. It takes a while. Obviously, they only flower once a year, and if you don't get it right, you've got to wait a year and see if you've got it right. And if you haven't, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I didn't get this one right, and then I did. I just committed to where it's going to go, which is bright, dappled light. They do say in Melbourne it is a companion plant to Cymbidium, so very, very similar conditions. If you imagine under a tree, dappled light in winter, perhaps a little bit stronger. Protection, certainly no long-term direct light and no afternoon direct light. Plenty of water. Bob's your uncle. Ta-da! And finally, it's happened. Now, this was a no ID that I got from Facebook Marketplace, so who knows what it's going to look like, but I'm very excited. Zygos are very fragrant generally, so this should be beautiful. Now, lots of spotting on the older leaves. That's just a trait of Zygopetalums, unfortunately. I think it's very rare that you'll find one with no spotting. It's not a sign of disease and virus, which most people immediately jump to when they see a spotted leaf. It's just what happens. They don't respond well to having moisture on the leaves when it's cold, etc., etc. All the new growths are wonderful on this, the new leaves, and then as they age and mature, they spot up. I'm not that worried about it, to be honest. It's what happens. But what I am very excited about is those two flower spikes. Oh my goodness. Now I will make another video about this when they open, and we can revisit the repotting video. Look at the plant, look at the size of it, it's just massive. Anyway, I've got two other zygos and I'm now deciding not to give up on them. Both those seedlings, this was definitely a flowering size plant when I bought it, but the seedlings, yeah, I'm now gonna commit to them. Well, there we are, plant lovers. Now, there are other things in spike. There are some species Oncidiums that are in spike and about to open. There are Cattleyas. Can you believe I've suddenly become a Cattleya flower? Goodness me, after years of not being able to like Zygopetalums. But anyway, I think I've got three with sheaths at the moment, which should all probably open about the same time. So let's do a video about that. Why not? Anyway, plant lovers, there we are. Heading into winter where you think nothing's going to happen, and there's a lot going on and a couple of things particularly interesting. So this Cymbidium I'm very interested in. The Catasetum type orchid, if that is a flower spike, I am beside myself. The Zygopetalum, boy, am I excited to see that. What else am I excited about? Phalaenopsis aphrodite that I haven't killed and is going to flower for me. There we are. Much for us to look forward to over the next coming months when all these flowers hopefully do their thing. Of course, terrible things could happen in the meantime, and such is life. But let's look on the bright side. Plant lovers, much to be excited about in this coming season. So wherever you are, I hope your orchids are spiking and flowering and being good citizens, and I look forward to seeing you next week on a Friday when I post my amateur rambling. Look forward to seeing you then.